Jonesy and Amanda.
Jam Nation.
Victoria Cross recipient Ben Roberts-Smith was one of the most highly decorated Australian soldiers. While he was being celebrated in the public eye, rumours and allegations of war crimes were being investigated in the background. Our next guest heard the rumours before we did. Award-winning journalist Chris Masters was one of the first to start an investigation into Robert Smith, and it's led to a new book called Flawed Hero, Truth, Lies and War Crimes. To tell us about that, Chris Masters, hello.
Hi there.
Hey, Chris, it's a hell of a book. It's a brave undertaking.
It took a long time, yeah. I mean, obviously there wouldn't be a book if we hadn't had the outcome that we had, but before the book came 110 days of court sittings and a judgment by a 700-page judgment by Justice Pasanko, and I'm really relieved enormously that his judgment on what occurred was pretty much parallel with ours.
When did you first start to hear rumours about Ben Roberts-Smith and some of his behaviour overseas?
I embedded with Special Forces. I'm the only journalist to have ever done so with Australian Special Forces in 2011. I suppose I started hearing things. I know by 2012 his name was coming up as a controversial figure, not a war criminal. And look, Amanda, I didn't take that much notice of it because, oddly enough, even though mateship is supposedly such a profound force in the Australian defence community, there's a lot of bitching too, particularly in Special Forces. They're the warrior elite, and they're the sort of the A-graders, so they tend to be very competitive. What I heard was that Ben was a bully and not necessarily always a pleasant bloke, but that didn't mean that he was a war criminal, and soldiers, especially Special Forces soldiers, have to be tough, have to be hard, have to be brutal to some degree. So, that wasn't such a surprise. It really wasn't until I got into an argument with him, if you like, about an incident that occurred in 2006, only because I started to hear competing accounts of the action that won him a Medal for Gallantry. And I had to put some questions to him, and really it went from there.
Wow. Because most Australians, and myself included, we interviewed Ben Roberts-Smith, I think at the time, when he got the Victoria Cross, and we were just impressed with him. It was almost like, it's like Superman suddenly turning out to be not such a Superman.
Yeah, well, I was too, Jonesy. I thought, when I first met him, I remember, well, I'd met him a few times, but we had this interview that went on for 2 hours, and I made a note at the time. For the first hour, he reasoned, and for the second hour, he ranted. I mean, he can put on that statesman-like visage where he gets the words right. He comes from an esteemed family. He went to a private school. He had a serious job. He was the managing director of Channel 7 in Queensland, so he could put on an impressive face. He did so in court as well. But after a while, it's that thing about truth. It's quite punishing. And after a while, if you kept hitting him with alternative facts, then that facade started to weaken.
What do you say, Chris, to people who say we can never understand what happens on the fields of war? It's not our place to judge these actions, and we should leave well enough alone.
Well, in the Second World War, when Japanese soldiers were bayoneting our soldiers to death, our prisoners on the Burma Rail, we didn't think much of that. When Sister Vivian Bullwinkle was machine-gunned to death by the Japanese, we didn't think much of that. We fought against that kind of conduct. We condemn the Nazis for killing civilians, but why is it different if Australians do it? That proposition that if they're wearing an Australian uniform, it's not a war crime, has never sat well with me. And look, it doesn't really sit well with the image of the Australian soldier either. I mean, the rules of war are pretty clear. You don't kill non-combatants. Certainly, it's a messy business, and certainly mistakes are made. But one of the things we tried to make clear all the way through, and still having the argument to this day, is that the matters that we dealt with were never fog of war, heat of the moment things. They were, we alleged, outright callous murders, and it wasn't just morally wrong, it was strategically wrong. You know, whenever this sort of thing happened in Afghanistan, it turned the local population against us.
Ben Roberts-Smith has steadfastly denied this and said that this is what is all about war. So he's never going to come around and say, oh, okay, you got me.
No, he's not, no. And of course, it is true to say that this has not been demonstrated to a criminal standard. This was a civil court action. It wasn't so much about, it wasn't a war crimes trial as much as it was a trial, a defamation trial. It was about whether we could truthfully support what we had asserted.
And will this lead to further recriminations for Ben?
Yes, I mean, there's a long way to go. The Office of the Special Investigator was set up after the Brereton inquiry to look into not just allegations involving Ben Roberts-Smith, but also other soldiers as well. And there's a prosecution about to begin with one of those matters. As far as Ben's concerned, there'll be an appeal process, we presume. We don't know for sure whether he will appeal, but we'll know within a week or so. And beyond that, there are prospective criminal charges.
Wow. If Ben Roberts-Smith was a good bloke, do you think he would have got away with this?
That's a good question, you know. I think in a way there's a damn good chance he would have. I mean, one of the reasons that those soldiers turned against him was they didn't think he was a good bloke. They were actually quite angry at the impact that Ben had on so many of their brothers, you know, particularly the younger ones. As one of them said to me, look, I don't mind him pushing a dirt farmer to his knees and blowing his brains out if he does it himself, but he was bullying other younger soldiers into doing it, and it was their consciences that couldn't cope.
Wow. Well, Chris, it's a fascinating read.
Absolutely.
Flawed Hero, Truth, Lies and War Crimes goes on sale from Wednesday at all good bookstores. Chris Masters, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.